Hi honeys, Lisa here, and I'm wanting to do a quick follow-up to the video I made last night about my new vintage Albano. As I was saying last night, this is an incredible deck. The coloration of the cards is beautiful, and in fact when Frankie Albano was producing this deck in the late 60s, what he was trying to do is he was trying to take the artwork from the original Waite Smith deck as it was coming to him through an edition like the 1959 University Books, pink backing with the white ink version of the deck. The coloration in that University Books edition, and that version was printed into, I believe, into the early 70s. The coloration is really garish. And so Frankie Albano said, okay, I want to make the colors what they should be. Frankie's desire to do that produced a deck that we now know as the Albano-Waite. He produced it in '68. It was printed for, we don't know exactly how long, so the best guess is maybe a couple years. Everything I know, by the way, about this deck, I know through Dusty White and through his website, the House of White Tarot Museum. Great source of information, URL below. The thing is, Albano, without him, we would not have Stuart Kaplan's Rider-Waite Smith deck. Albano was the person who brought this deck into the modern consciousness by giving it the kind of vibrant colors that brought Pixie's imagery to life, right? Thanks to what Frankie did, we have the modern deck, right? We have everything that comes after through Stuart Kaplan. Frankie Albano's deck, it's the first version of the deck to come out in a yellow tuck box. Doesn't that look familiar from Stuart Kaplan, right? It's the first deck to come out with the little white book, although in Frankie's case, his little white book typically had a goldenrod cover, so it was like the little goldenrod book. It was the first, he's the first guy to produce a majors only version of Pixie's deck, and he's the first guy to produce a giant majors only version of Pixie's deck. Those are available, by the way, the 22, the majors and the giant majors, those are available periodically on eBay. They're usually really spendy, and I've never managed to buy one, and also sort of, strangely enough, don't feel compelled to buy one. At any rate, Frankie disappeared, and Stuart Kaplan ultimately started printing his deck in the early 90s. So there's the 1968 versions of the deck, and then there's the versions of the deck that start being produced by Stuart Kaplan in the early 90s. This is an eBay find. This is an early 91 version of the deck. I had thought that this was printed in Belgium, but actually, as I was looking for today's video, it says made in Italy. So I had thought that the earliest versions of this were printed in Belgium maybe through AGM. So maybe I don't own the earliest US Games version of it. What I will say is that when you look in the little white book that comes with the US Games version, it says, I can't tell if that's facsimile of the 1968 edition, right? Stuart Kaplan just printed this deck. So if you buy the Albano-Waite today, if you don't buy a vintage version, you're buying US Games facsimile version, meaning a scan of the Frankie Albano 1968 edition. And that's where the difficulties lie, because in the US Games reprint of this deck, which is basically a reprint from the cards that have survived from 1968, there are differences in coloration that I still don't really understand, and differences in quality that sort of make sense when you're working with a facsimile edition. So what I own is two of the New Color edition. This is actually the New Color Deluxe edition. This is actually the second Frankie Albano edition to come out, and I own one version of the accurate color tone. The cards from these two editions are the same. I can't discern any difference between the cards. The colors are the same. The card stock is the same. It's slightly glossy. It actually has a really nice finish. It's very thin. My camera is probably not going to be able to pick this up, but there's, you're not going to be able to see it. There's a slight, I'm hoping, you can't see it. There's a slight linen texturing that you can sort of see. And I think that linen texturing is what makes the cards feel nice. So despite the fact that it's very thin cardstock, it's very nice cardstock. And you can see, I mean, my 3 versions of the deck, despite the boxes being beat to crap, the cards have survived. Their colors are still vibrant. What else do I want to say about that? Oh, just fun fact, I discovered when I was preparing for this video that not only do I have a first edition, but I probably have a first printing of the first edition. You see how there's no address here? Well, there is an address, the P.O. box on the new Color Deluxe edition. First printing of the accurate color tone first edition didn't have the address. Subsequent printings of the first edition list an address on Melrose. So at least from the box, it looks like I actually have a first printing, which is cool. Looking at the box, it looks like I have a first printing. The problem with buying the Albano-Waite vintage on eBay is that the cards themselves are the same from one printing to the next. And this is even true when you have a US Games. This is from the 1991 US Games thing. The cards themselves, there's nothing really obvious about the cards that will tell you whether an edition is earlier or later. There's no copyright. The calligraphy is the same, right? And so it's possible, and I think this deck, this is the case, it's possible that what you end up buying when you buy a 1968 Tarot Productions version of the Albano-Waite, it's possible that you may end up getting a deck that is what my husband likes to call a Frankenstein edition, where maybe pieces are from the deck that the same deck that came in the original box, and maybe pieces have been replaced from something else. So in this case, notice how the Two of Wands is kind of the odd man out. Now it's possible that that Two of Wands came in this deck and it's just the one card that had a weird coloring, but more likely somebody replaced that card at some later date. And in fact, in the edition I got, when I bought this, it came with the King of Wands. It says Dark Man on the top. It's always helpful when people put the keywords on their cards for you. Yeah. So I ended up buying, you can find on eBay single vintage cards, and so I bought myself another King of Wands and just replaced it. So if I were ever to sell this deck, my accurate color tone, the really ethical and honest thing to do, if I were to sell it, would be to say the King of Wands has been replaced from another deck. The King of Wands is an interesting card, by the way. The one way you can tell that, from looking at the image alone, that you have an authentic 1968 Tarot Productions deck is notice the blemish on the King of Wands. That's a blemish that appears on every version of the deck. But when I look at the later US Games imprint, the facsimile, the blemish is gone. That's the one thing, other than colors being different, just looking at the images themselves, that I've noticed. Okay, colors being different. That's the key piece. So there are the two 78 card decks that came out in Frankie Albano's day. And then US Games starts printing, as I say, the deck as a facsimile in the late 80s, early 90s. The cardstock in the US Game edition is thicker. I don't know if you can see it, is thicker. It's more durable feeling, it's glossier. It doesn't have the linen finish. And so in some ways, if you're looking for a beefier deck, the US Games is thicker, it's beefier. Now, I did end up acquiring at one point a more recent version of this deck, the one that's being sold today if you go to Amazon, and it was plastic. So what I want to do, and I will check this out, is to see where the deck is being printed. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. I want to see where the deck is being printed now, today in 2019, because it might be that they've switched over, as they have with other decks, that US Games has switched over to Chinese printing technology as opposed to the Italian, in which case the cardstock may have improved even more. But this, you know, if you find on eBay one of these with this this cover, either printed in Italy or in Belgium, the cardstock is beefier and you know, it's thicker and it's more durable feeling. However, and here's the issue about color, when we start to look at the coloration in the deck, the US Games version is simply not as vibrant. And that's particularly the case, most notably the case, in the quartz for the Pentacles. So these are the original Tarot Productions 1968 version of the Court of Pentacles, with this glorious kind of lavender, is that periwinkle? Bluish purple. Keep that in mind, and let's take a peek at what US Games does. These become gray. I don't understand it. Nobody understands it. Why? Why would you shift toward gray? The only thing I can think, because it's a consistent shift, it never gets corrected. If you buy this deck having been printed by US Games like yesterday, it will be gray in the Pentacles. The only thing I can think is that, in fact, Stuart Kaplan was like tweaking the color palette just a little bit to create some distinction between his version of the Albano-Waite and Frankie Albano's version of the Albano-Waite. That's the only thing I can think, because otherwise I don't understand why the colors would shift so dramatically. And there are other shifts throughout as well, some less dramatic, but equally upsetting. So let's look, for instance, at the Knight of Swords. So as I was saying in my video last night, the swords kind of get flattened out in Albano-Waite's deck. It's clear that he doesn't, I think it's clear that he sees the swords as a kind of problematic suit, as many of us do. So the sort of gray of the clouds, the sort of duskiness of this, well, I don't even know what color you call that, sort of camel brown taupe color in the Knight of Swords. Now look at what happens, in the US Games version. It tilts toward more olive green, first of all, and we lose some detail in the clouds. It's subtle, but I think it adds a little bit more dimension to the colors and less dimension to the clouds in the US Games version. We've got, because it's more green, it just has a slightly less, there's something a little bit sickening to my eye about this Knight of Swords. And it's a little bit less sickening. Now, I don't know if that makes sense, if I'm just hallucinating a meaning to this difference, but I'm hoping that it translates. Where else would I say that there are big issues? Well, maybe a little bit in the, yeah, not so much. In the Devil, this is Albano-Waite's, this is the US Games version. A little bit more blue, more coloring in the beard. It's a little bit messy, actually, in Frankie's edition. And there's a certain messiness throughout his deck, like overlapping colors, which I find really charming. And then things get kind of cleaned up for the US Games version. And the Devil is browner rather than this weird kind of olive drab. So the colors are different in the US Games edition, and that difference, I think, makes a difference. But nowhere is it as disturbing as in the Pentacle suit. So all of this to say, you can get a nicer cardstock for your AlbanoWaite by buying particularly the 90s edition of the deck. But you won't get the true AlbanoWaite. To get the true AlbanoWaite, you really do need to find yourself a vintage Tarot Productions edition. And then, yes, you will have flimsy, flimsy cardstock. But it feels nice. All right, that's all I got. Hope that was helpful, interesting. Hope it made sense. There was a lot of information to convey. As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your practice. Okay, take care, y'all. Hey gang, just a quick PS. So a little bit of incorrect information. I got myself confused. Somehow the AlbanoWaite edition that we were looking at together in this video, that was the US Games version with the really muddy Pentacles court. I knew that that deck was printed in Belgium, and so I went through my spare boxes. I keep boxes from decks that I purchase if I take the decks out of their bag, and I found the right, no you can't see, the right box for this deck. It is printed in Belgium. That's where the early 90s AlbanoWaite US Games decks were printed. They have the nice Cartamundi cardstock that's familiar to any of us who have gotten an AGM deck. It's the same AGM cardstock that we associate with those printings from the 90s and the 2000s and even from today. This box, what I was showing you in the video to begin with, this was the box that came with the Italian-made AlbanoWaite that I bought maybe 4 years ago, which I never ended up keeping. I trimmed it, I kept it for a little while, then I gifted it away. And that's why I have an extra box, because that plasticized deck I took out of the box. So somehow there was a box screw up. Now I mention this because if you are trying to find the nice cardstock, that Cartamundi cardstock for a US Games version of the AlbanoWaite, what you're going to be looking for is indeed something that says that it's printed in Belgium. It won't have a barcode on the top. Otherwise, the box looks really similar to what you can find on the market today, but this has a barcode and says printed in Italy. Now what I'm going to do and find out, and I'll update you when I learn, is to see whether AlbanoWaites in 2019, if they are being printed by US Games in China, and if so, what the cardstock is like. Okay, yeah, so this is the US Games version, printed in Belgium, early 90s, nice Cartamundi, slightly glossy cardstock. This is the correct box. It says printed in Belgium, no ISBN. Sorry for that mix-up. Okay, ta-ta.